please welcome Dr. Catherine Ross.
Well, thank you, Deeksha. I've enjoyed working with you, getting all this ready. Just a quick word about the University of Texas System Academy of Distinguished Teachers, which I have the honor of leading for 2 years. It's something I hope a lot of other universities systems will think about. About 7 years ago, 12 faculty were chosen from the 8 universities in our system by outside reviewers who are considered to be the most innovative and effective teachers in the system. And we began a group called the University of Texas System Academy of Distinguished Teachers with the plan of always being active advocates for good teaching, especially undergraduate teaching, and also to do all we can to support excellent instruction. To date, we have written 2 hardback books. There's an ebook available of one of them. We have we've got a blog on teaching. We've done op-eds. We do workshops for faculty. We have a networking listserv. We just started our annual teaching conferences, and we've also in the process of implementing an educator exchange, something like a Fulbright. In many ways, I think that we are sort of like in this UT system what Course Hero has been doing as well, and we've seen a lot of similarities. The reason why we bring it to you is that we don't know of any other groups around that are doing it, and we have found it enormously productive and rewarding of an enterprise. And so we hope many of you all will think about doing something like that so that you can create some of your own action-oriented academies. Having said this, let me introduce one of our fellows, Kevin Schug.
Hi, Kathy. Very happy to be here today to talk about this important topic. I'm really, been pleased to be a member of this UT System Academy of Distinguished Teachers for the past few years. It's been an amazing place to meet new people and to talk about innovations, teaching, and best practices. I'm a professor of chemistry at the University of Texas at Arlington. I will be your STEM representative for this panel discussion. You can see one of our laboratories behind me here. This is the Shimatsu Center for Advanced Analytical Chemistry. So I'm an analytical chemist and I mainly train people to use these instruments, but obviously concerned about the whole pipeline of chemistry education in college. So very happy to be here, and I'll hand it off to Vandy.
Hi everybody, I'm Vandy Dubre. Behind me is the library here at UT Tyler. I am the Fine Arts, Literature, and Education Specialist Librarian. I've been here for 20 plus years now. I was an underprepared student back in the day, so I feel like I can really commiserate with these students. And I was actually, back in my bachelor's program, I was actually a student under Dr. Catherine Ross. I'm now going to turn it over to Kenneth Bryant.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kenneth Bryant. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at UT Tyler. It's my 4th year at the institution. Like Vandy, I'm really excited to be a part of this because I was an underprepared student as well. So it feels like a special moment. We get to talk about a group of students that absolutely deserve our attention and our encouragement. So I'm happy to be a part of this. I think Elyce.
I'm Elyce Keith. I am a UT Tyler senior. I'm an English major and I'm preparing to be a high school teacher. I have definitely been an underprepared student, and I really feel like I can give a different perspective, and that's why I'm so honored to be a part of this. And I'm really excited for how much this can do for other professors to help these underprepared students. And I'm going to hand it off to Mr. John Swanson.
Hi, my name is John Swanson. I'm coming into my last year of an MBA, or last semester rather, here at UT Tyler. I was an underprepared student and sometimes continue to be an underprepared student, so I'm glad to offer my perspective in this panel. And next, we're going to pass it to Margot.
Hey, I'm Margaret Moore. I am a senior transfer student at UT Tyler, and it's such a privilege to be a part of this today. It's awesome to see that there's so many professors that care and want to address these issues, and I'll just give it back to Dr. Ross.
Okay, so the first question we have for you all, that we've tried to answer, is who are the underprepared students? And they are, of course, our first generation students, many of us were, They're students from smaller rural or underfunded city schools. Sometimes they're students from college preparatory schools or junior colleges that operated differently from the way a four-year institution typically works. Sometimes it's your honors or your straight A students who are used to not working real hard and doing very, very well, and then suddenly discovering that higher education is much more of a challenge. And then, of course, nobody was prepared for the pandemic, including us. So that's our group. Kevin? So Kevin's going to talk about what are they underprepared for. Kevin? Kevin, you're muted. There you go.
Right. Made the big faux pas. So what I'm going to give you here is just a very quick outline of kind of the three main topics that we'd like to address, in terms of giving some possible solutions for addressing underprepared students. But generally we're talking about, students that are underprepared for how much harder and how much more demanding college work is going to be. They're unskilled at engaging with this material, and it's certainly a step up from what they've been doing previously, you would imagine in most cases. And then they're also underprepared for many new emotional challenges that they're going to encounter in college. And so, I think we're going to try to give you guys some places that, things to think about for each one of these three topics.
And also, we will supply our outline for you all at the end if you'd like that. It'll be in my profile at Course Hero. We're going to take each one of the three areas Kevin just listed and offer ways to help. But first, we have 4 big moves we'd like to suggest for everybody to do. The first thing is a lot of students really don't know what we know. They obviously don't know what we know about our disciplines, why we do what we do, how it can be useful. And so one thing you need to do, I started doing this a couple years back and it really changed my classes, is explain early and often the purposes, both short-term and long-term, of what you do, what your discipline is about, how it will add to their skills later on, even if, in my case, I teach a lot of English classes to students who don't want to be English majors, and I talk about how those skills will help them. Also helping them understand that some of the work is boring, but it's important. And if they can understand why it's important, if you explain that to them, they're much more likely to stick with that boring and yet important work. And the other thing too is it's really good to let them know a little bit about why you do, why you love your discipline and why you do it. Kenneth and Kevin have the next point for us, the next of the 4 big moves. Okay. Kenneth, you want to take it away?
All right. Students want to know that we're on their side. Students want to know that we're not the warden, right? We understand that they're coming from situations that are not, or just as say suboptimal, right? And that we are there to help and encourage them because we want them to pass and we want them to do well, right? That's, I think, half the battle, right? Students coming in, they're looking at you and they're studying you, and they're determining whether you're someone who's going to get some glee out of failing them or someone who's going to get some glee out of helping them and helping them be successful and take away something from the course that you're in. So I think setting a tone in the very beginning of a semester, letting them know that, hey, I understand, is going to be, I think, very helpful for the students in terms of opening them up to you, but also opening them up in terms of learning what you have to share, because they know that they don't have to be afraid and coming to you and asking for help, right? We know, we'll talk about it a little later. We know that's a barrier, especially if you've given off the impression that you don't want to be bothered, right? So certainly giving them the impression that you are organized, that you're calm, that you're approachable, all those things are going to help with our underprepared students.
Yeah, you're going to see the anxiety just melt away on the student's face on the first day when you step into the classroom and tell them, I am here to help you learn. I am not here just to administer grades and give you a check that you got through this classwork. I'm here to help you learn. And it makes me think about, like being a coach, right? A lot of us probably had the coaching experience where, we did something wrong and the coach was like, all right, that's 10 push-ups, do it again, I'm gonna make you run a whole lap. Well, of course, that sounds quite punitive, but unfortunately, I think that's what a lot of people that's what their experience with coaches was. But if you think more about like an NBA coach heard one of them talk to their players, it's all encouragement. It's all, I'm on your back. I'm going to help you correct this. I'm going to help you get better. And we got to be a lot more like those NBA coaches, and the students have to realize that that's our tone in the class.
Elyce is going to share with you the third big move we like to share.
So at UT Tyler, there's several like smaller junior colleges that make up a large percentage of our student population as far as transfers, and like really getting to know these feeder schools, like your local high schools, your community colleges, your junior colleges, and learning, you know, what they do and how they're teaching and what challenges you're going to face to now teaching these students. Like, what challenges did they bring with them? How are these junior colleges teaching these students, and like how are they performing versus how they need to perform at your four-year institution? And a lot of times there's a large gap there, and you really need to know where their base starting from so that you can know how far you need to push them and how like far they need to be brought up.
And you know, there's another issue I want to add on to this one too. For years, I taught at a fancy college preparatory school where people are paying a lot of money to get their kids into Stanford and Harvard and Yale. And I went from there to UT Austin to get my PhD. And I was shocked at the difference between what we in the English department at this fancy school were teaching and what was now the cutting edge in my discipline. And so it's another important reason for this outreach to the other schools. Vandy has our fourth big move, and then we'll start talking about some nitty gritty.
Yes, it's actually also important to partner with your subject librarian. Most universities have a specialized subject research librarian devoted to a department or a subject. And it's kind of imperative because what you're doing is you're setting up that support structure for the student. It's not just about, I'm going to be supportive in my classroom and then you can sink or swim outside. You're layering in all that support, and it also will help support you as the professor, because when you work in a partnership with your librarian, then you have a better understanding of what they can and are willing to do to support you, which would be surprising. I mean, we tend to be a jack of all trades, and when we know ahead of time what's going on and what you're teaching and what you want from your students, then we can prepare all manners of support materials to help them, either videos or research guides, all of these different things that we can customize specifically for those students so that they get a better support for all of this stuff inside and outside of the classroom.
Vandy and I will talk some more about that. I've had great success with my teaching my students how to do research and write good research papers by doing exactly what Vandy just said. And she came to me one day and, Dr. Ross, you remember me? I sure do, and we got it going. I'm really pleased with that. So let's talk about the first category of things that we think students are underprepared for. Kevin, would you take this category for us?
Sure. Yeah. So we're going to first talk about, you know, how much harder and more demanding college work usually is. There's obviously a higher level of critical thinking. We have to, you know, write papers. We got to do work in laboratories. We have all these, you know, different new classes and subjects. And you know, it's going to be very daunting. You know, just take, for example, we did an educational program a few years ago. We were looking at helping students in high loss courses. And we were looking at some of the necessary math courses that they might need to be successful in, let's say, general chemistry. And we found out, for example, that if a student was not calculus ready, that they were 40% more predisposed to failing that class than they were calculus ready, which is kind of strange because you don't really have any calculus in general chemistry, but really it was a demonstration that somebody who was, quote, calculus ready would not be afraid to do algebra with things like 10 to the 23rd and, you know, have all these crazy dimensional analysis and things. So yeah, it's a step up, and you know, but we can help. I mean, I think we've really had a great time preparing for this panel to figure out, you know, how are some ways that we can help meet these challenges. So Margot, can you start us off there?
Yeah, I can definitely. A big way to start this off and to just figure out how you can help is to build a relationship with your students, get to know everyone. I know it's corny, but those icebreaker conversations and just the little quizzes that kind of help you assess where each student is individually. I think that's really important. Also, all of your students are at different places. So I think that it's really good to just meet them where they're at and help them feel comfortable with where they're at so that they can approach you in turn and come to you with some questions that they might have. John, do you have anything?
John, yeah, you had a comment to add on that, didn't you, John?
Sure. It also allows you to like gauge where they are on an individual level, if possible. It allows you to kind of push where they need to be pushed, you know, do what works for them and is going to be what's best to help them succeed. Kenneth?
Kenneth.
Yeah, you know, I'm thinking transitions are difficult, and we know for underprepared students, those transitions from high school into college is especially difficult, in particular with writing papers, writing research papers. There is a great resource that I was actually given by my professor, Dr. Marvin Overby, that was some sage advice on how to write at the higher ed level. And you can find that particular resource on Dr. Ross's Course Hero site. I highly encourage it. It's well written. It's written in a very sort of approachable, there's that word, approachable form. But it really does sort of break down what students should avoid and what students should embrace when it comes to writing at the higher ed level, at the college level. So I would encourage you all to take a peek at that document. And if you have documents, sure, let us know.
Absolutely. That's one of the great things about Course Hero, lots of things to share. One of the things I created was something called Best Practices for College Students. It's kind of a checklist. And both Kevin in chemistry and I in English have got documents that we built up that help students to prognosticate how well they'll do if they do X, Y, and Z. And those are all going to be available for you on my profile. Another thing we need to do is model critical thinking. And I've started using reading guides, or that I was taught how to do this from an economics professor at the University of Kentucky at another conference. He calls them class preparation assignments. But what they are basically is a reading guide to the homework. You give it to them ahead of time, and it guides them. In my case, in English, I guide them to sort of looking for the key points, notice important issues about characters or transitions or stylistic things, kind of things they might not know to look for on their own. And so as they read, it's kind of like me looking over their shoulder. Also giving them rubrics for those writing assignments, using your TAs to demonstrate how they think critically, showing students your own reading notes. Margot and Elyce have both experienced my CPAs, as we call our reading guides. You want to comment on those, Margot?
Yeah, definitely. I found them very helpful. One thing that I noticed when you transition from high school to college, there is just a huge amount of reading. And sometimes it's like, okay, where do I dive in? How do I even decipher this? What am I looking for? And so it really does. It kind of narrows it down and it helps you build the platform so that you get to a point where you should know what you're looking for on your own and you're able to actually dig a little bit deeper and see what else you can find. So I found it very beneficial.
John, did you have something to add on that point too, I think? Maybe not. Well, we'll move on. We don't want to run out of our time here. Kevin wanted to talk a little bit about math support programs.
Yeah, so I opened this part up telling you we identified this math issue with kids not being calculus ready, but we can't just let those 40% fail. I mean, if they we're going to try to do something to help them. So we developed some, basically use an emerging scholar program model where we're doing some supplemental instruction and cohorting students quite intentionally together to solve, let's say, challenging problems. So the idea here is to provide them with problems that are actually probably a bit harder than that they're going to have on the exam. Now they get to work them in a group, and they have TAs around them to help guide them through this. But the idea is to gain confidence, working together with people, shoring up knowledge, obviously working on a challenging problem to gain the knowledge of that material. Very important, the success of such an endeavor is having good TAs, people who are not going to just go and tell them the answer, but who are trained to kind of lead people to think critically, to ask questions, to decipher the different parts of a problem and break it down to ultimately you can get a solution. So this type of a nice critical thinking is modeled very well in such a support program that the students could then, obviously hopefully take on and use to their advantage in their course.
John, did you remember what you wanted to say? I kind of cut you off.
I didn't really have anything. Okay. I don't have much experience with CPAs.
No, you haven't had any CPAs. You haven't been in my classes. I'm sorry. I've been getting anxious about our time here. So the thing I wanted to add, though, is that I think one of the folks in our audience is Michael Starbird, who is another one of the Academy Fellows. And he has had an enormous success at UT Austin with this mathematics support program. They have gone from students, like a huge number of students just not being able to complete the program, to almost no dropouts. And I'm sure that if you attend one of he's got a session later on today that he can tell you more about it. It's something we're really proud of. Vandy, you want to tell them a little bit about the research situation that you and I worked on?
Yes, I would think kind of going back into, they don't understand how demanding college work is the side of that when it comes to their research. And I've seen it, like I said, I've been here for a number of years, and I see it every year where they don't know what they don't know. So they've written research papers in high school, and they come to college and they're saying, okay, here's a research paper. And they say, oh yeah, I did that. I know how to do all of that. Well, in high school, typically their research is using one database maybe, but mostly Google. And they don't understand that they need to evaluate sources or any of that. And so, even I've had faculty say, well, I asked them at the beginning of the semester, did they know how to do research, or did they know about the library? And they say yes. Well, again, if they don't know what they don't know, they think they know. So, when the librarians start working with them, and especially me, I sit down with them and I address, at their level. But I see it all the time. Oh, I didn't know I had to evaluate that. I didn't know that this is what this was giving me. I didn't know about all of these sources or how to work this database, that I could get this really good information. And so it's getting them past that of, oh, I know how to do it, and I turn in junk, which happened to me my first semester here at UT Tyler, I'll admit. 7-page paper, I was left with the opening paragraph. But it does, you have to step up into that role of, I've got to step up into actual real research. And going back to the idea of, telling them why you do what you do is, for us, is getting those critical thinking skills, why you have to evaluate your sources, going out and finding all of these news. This is something they're going to have to do for the rest of their life because we're bombarded with information. So it's not just, I have to do this research for this one research paper. It's these underlying skills that they're going to use for the rest of their life.
Yeah, and partnering with a librarian in your classes, for you classroom teachers in the humanities, or anybody who assigns a research paper, it was a real breakthrough for me. For one thing, it takes a lot of the load off of me. I don't have to teach them the library skills, but Vandy will literally come into my classroom and work with each student individually. She helped me design the research projects, topics, so that we knew that they were ones that our libraries could serve well. And I know that Elyce and Margot have both had experiences with this. You want to comment on it, Elyce or Margot?
So what I liked most about, with the yellow slip appointment, as like we called it, with Vandy, was that she had like these online modules before you went in. So you kind of understood, like, if your research was Google before and that's all you knew, you kind of now understood like what a good source is, like, the difference between, what to put in quotations and what your subject is, and like all these different little things that you really need to know. So even if you didn't understand it completely, she was there to help you, but you didn't walk in just dumbfounded, like you had no idea what you were doing. You felt like you had enough of a basis to where you weren't intimidated to walk in, and I felt like that was very important.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that. I'd say that Vandy has even mentioned there's this thing called library anxiety, and people just get really anxious to go into the library. You have to go out of your way, and it's just so overwhelming. And if you don't know what you're doing or all of the resources that you have, it's just kind of like, where do I dive in? And so since they've partnered up together, they kind of laid it out like exactly what to do. You go in. Vandy was very friendly. I think it's so important to have someone who can assure you and meet you where you're at and not expect that you should know all of these things, and because then you're just kind of like, okay, what am I doing here? But it was very laid out, and it was easy going, and we just kind of worked through it together till we got to the point where I knew what I was doing and I felt confident. So it was just cool to be able to build those skills and have that partnership. So I think that it's great that we partner.
And to round off this part of this segment of our area of discussion, you need to remember, always explain very clearly, early and often, what the expectations are of assignments, of class behaviors, what is a homework supposed to look like, how do you really do an experiment, what is an exam, how do you go about taking and preparing for exam. A lot of these are skills, practical skills. And Elyce has always pointed out is to be sure to do what, Elyce?
Always, always, always put every assignment that you have, whether it's reading or a paper or a discussion that's due, onto your learning management system. So your Blackboard or your Canvas, and put it, that way it shows up in your students' to-do list. And even if you have a 2-page paper that's due 2 weeks from now, every single day when you check your to-do list, you see you have that paper. And so even when you're not actively working on it, you're thinking about it and you're kind of getting it in order in your head as to how, like, you know, what to write about or what it should look like. And so that is like such an important thing to do, and it's so helpful for students.
So the next area, second category of issues for which they are underprepared, are a little more practical. The truth is, they are not only are they not prepared for this higher level thinking, they a lot of times just don't have the skills or know how to engage in college level material. So they don't know how to study, they don't know how to get help, they don't know how to take responsibility for their own learning. They've been guided through it for too much. And so how can we help? Well, we start out by remembering that you don't just have to teach your subject. You've got to teach them how to learn by teaching necessary skills, and then structuring your courses to give them practice with those skills. The skills that we think students need the most, and I think all the students on the panel have agreed, are note-taking, speaking up in class, boy, that's a hard one for them, reviewing, learning from and working with their classmates. We've already talked about research, we'll talk about it again, and then being organized. So let me talk a little more specifically about note-taking. I actually didn't know I had to teach students how to take notes until a couple semesters ago, when I would go into class, and about 10 minutes in, they were just sitting there staring at me like I was so brilliant and entertaining, but they weren't taking a single note. And when I started talking to them about what to do, of course, this was a freshman, sophomore survey class, so I had to teach them how to do it. And I actually have a really good little lesson I can share with you all about that has analyzed how much people remember if they take notes versus if they don't take notes and so on. And by showing that data to the students, it kind of made the point. And then I went on, and boy, I required them to take notes every day. I shared my notes with them. A couple times I did a notes check to make sure they were doing it, and they got the idea pretty quickly. Margot, talk to them about this issue of speaking up in class.
So speaking up in class, it's definitely a barrier for some people. Freshman year, sophomore year, you're in a class and it's kind of overwhelming. Your professor asks you a question and everyone just kind of looks at each other like, okay, are you going to speak? Are you going to speak? Who's going to say something? And so you just feel that awkward tension. But if the professor kind of sets it out on the first day, like, this is a class where we're going to engage with each other, you definitely need to set that vibe out. And I think a good way to do that, like Dr. Ross did, was the mandatory speaking in class. Like, there's a quota that we had to meet. And so you could kind of plan when you wanted to speak, and you could have your opportunity to say something. But I think that barrier definitely needs to be broken. And a way that it can be broken is to be called out on. I mean, it's not fun, but like, the more you get called out on, the more you see other people are talking. And when your professor just says, you know, everybody, whether you know the answer or not, we need you to raise your hand, and you can point at someone who does know, but everybody needs to be active. And I think that makes for the most lively classrooms and the best conversations when people are able to speak. And so I think it's really good.
And you know, when I first started telling students, you are going to be required to speak a certain number of times, boy, some of them really didn't like that. And I do give them the option, if they're one of the people who just are terrified of doing it, to give their comments that week in the discussion board. But I want to read you something that I actually heard last year at this conference, and it's from Samuel Delaney, a novelist and educator, and he said this: "Don't you realize that every time you don't answer a question, you're learning something? You're learning how to make do with what you got. You're learning how not to ask for a raise. You're learning how to take it, and that's not good. So from now on, I want you all to speak up. And even if you don't know the answer, say you don't and turn to someone who might be able to help you." The other way to help students learn how to speak in class, of course, and I'm sure many of you do this, is to have small study groups and to give them a question to work on together in their group, and then have them convene back with the class and do the answers in that way. I think John had something to say about this too. John, did...
Yeah, I think study groups are super important. I'll tell you, I wouldn't have made it through undergrad if I didn't meet a solid group of my peers. And, you know, those friendships and relationships last to this day. You know, we can still count on each other and depend on each other. But I'd also like to backpedal a bit and, you know, mention speaking up in class. We were just talking about it. I think it's important for educators to encourage and incentivize students to speak up like you do, because I think wrong answers are beneficial too. I think oftentimes, you know, underprepared first generation students, they may not have the emotional maturity, or they may be shy, or they may just not know that that helps them. It helps them grow. Kenneth, I think you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to add something really quick, because I think it's important to note when we talk about students speaking up in class. It's important to be sensitive to the various identities of the students who are in these spaces, because social conditioning has basically told some students that they won't be heard when they speak up. They're not visible, right? And so being sensitive to that and saying it's safe to speak up and you're going to be heard in the class, reiterate that and make that point continuously is going to be very important for your Black and brown students and all the intersecting identities for people who are from traditionally marginalized communities, to let them know that you can speak up and you're going to be heard in this space.
It's also important for shy girls.
Yeah.
So I think that's another reason that it's really important. And all of us have methods for that, but I think it's something we need to work. It's one of the biggest barriers to students really being engaged in a classroom and learning.
If I could.
Sure.
I think that a really good technique for professors and doctors to use is positive reinforcement. So if I were to speak up in class and say something completely idiotic, just thinking that I'm just asking some sort of question, or if I have the answer totally wrong, I think that it's really helpful to be reaffirmed even when I'm wrong. I mean, of course, you don't have to say that the person is right, but just to kind of be like, okay, I see where your thought process is going. Like, this is what we're doing. Like, yeah, that's some good commentary, just to kind of keep the attitude positive, so that wrong answers are still, like Kenneth said, they're still heard and they're still reaffirmed, but they can be redirected. So I think that that is so big, just to be positive with your reinforcement.
And, you know, the other thing too, of course, is that we all know that the more different ways students are involved with the material, the more likely they are to retain it. And so if they will talk about it as well as listen, other people talking about it, it's a huge step in their learning process. Another skill I like to teach and spend a lot of time on is reviewing. If you've ever read Make It Stick or any of the research on cognition, you'll know that you just have to, you have to sort of bury things a little bit deeper and deeper and deeper each time. You have to review things. And also students need to understand that the kind of level of work we're doing, it doesn't happen quickly. It's deeper, it's more complicated work and more complicated information. And so they have to kind of play with it and dig down and review quite a lot. Also, learning from and working with your classmates has really helped my students a lot. I use study teams, and students groan when they think study groups, and oh gosh, I'm going to have to be the one who picks up for all the slackers. But if you structure study teams properly, all of them will share in the work. And honestly, Elyce will tell you that you all learn more from your class presentations from each other, I think, than several of my lectures. Isn't that right?
Oh, we definitely did. but we had like, each of us had like a small, like almost niche project project that we had to do for the class that was, you know, on one of the topics that we were reading about. And we each had to get up and do research with Vandy. And then we presented in front of our class, and we held like discussions at the end, and you really had the chance to be like the teacher, but it also gave students opportunities to teach other students about things that, you know, Dr. Ross might not have had time to cover, like these very like niche topics. You get a lot of information, a lot of really good, interesting information that you wouldn't normally have time to teach. So I thought it was very, very beneficial.
And Kevin has some neat things that he does with lab groups and cohorts and challenge problems where students work together. You want to mention that, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, and it's just interesting, like, you know, hearing these discussions, and you know, even me personally, like, I think, you know, I had trouble in college for sure, and I think I came from a very well prepared high school, but you know, obviously, I was successful. I, you know, got here, and now I'm a professor. I think one of the things that is always striking to me is how interested students are when you tell them how you were successful, like how you learned to take notes, like what was your strategy that got you through. Like, I think that I've always been surprised at how much interest that story has. But back to the lab groups and the cohorts, I've already talked about, you know, we using cohorts to try to get students to work in groups and these challenge problems. Well, obviously we also do a lot of laboratory work, and recently, a colleague of mine and myself have changed the curriculum for our general chemistry students to a more inquiry-based lab. And to do this, they basically are in groups. And for the first semester, we actually have them rotate their group every project. And they have a number of these different projects, the idea being that they get to know all of their classmates. And then by the second year, they get to pick their group mates. So they've been able to kind of help naturally kind of do this, this process.
You know, sharing with your students that you don't always get it the first time, or that you struggle with something, is really, really important. I had an experience when I was in grad school. I had to go back and take freshman German for my area requirements of my PhD, and I ended up having to take courses taught by assistant instructors that were my classmates. I mean, they were teaching German and I was teaching English, and the ones who treated it like it was so easy and kind of looked down their noses at us because it was hard for us, it was very demoralizing to me. And here I was, the same age as some of the assistant instructors in German, the ones who recognized that German was not an easy job language to study, or in my case, English is not always easy for everybody, or math isn't always easy. If you recognize that, it puts them at ease as well. Moving along, Vandy and I have already talked a little bit about our joint research project. One thing about that is that it's integrated into my class, and also I follow the students a lot more closely now that I have Vandy to help. And sometimes Vandy would be able to let me know, so-and-so's having a hard time with this, Dr. Ross, can you help her? You want to add a little bit to that, Vandy, and then we'll move on to getting organized and a couple of the other things we have on this category.
Yeah, let me go back and explain the yellow slip. I know we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but what we do with this class is, you know, beforehand, Dr. Ross and I meet and we discuss it. We plan it all out. We know what research topics we're going to break out depending on what novels they're going to use. I create a lot of support materials, but the biggest thing that we do is that the students are required to meet with me outside of class. And that's called a yellow slip. I literally have a yellow slip of paper that we work through. And that's me meeting with them on their specific research topic. So it's just me and them one-on-one. They don't have to be afraid of, oh, if I ask this question, I'm gonna look stupid, because it's just me and them. And we're looking at their specific research topic, and we're working through the research, whatever issues we come up with, breaking down the keywords, how to structure that search and craft it, the specific databases or, you know, Google resources that will help them. And I'm working with them at their level. If they are already familiar with JSTOR and stuff, then we'll move on. If not, we back up and we tackle it from there. And I think that really helps them, for one, understand that, hey, I'm going to leave this and I'm going to have my resources. I mean, that's an hour well spent. But also they understand that I'm there to help them. And what I found is that it has to be required. It's just general nature where if something's not required, it goes to the end of the list. And it may have seemed like a great idea, but time management. But also the library anxiety that we mentioned. They feel, for whatever reason, maybe a past experience, that they're going to come in, they're going to ask us a question, and we're going to think they're stupid. And I always try to get across to the students that that is not going to be the case with me. I walked in not knowing. I don't expect them to know. But that also, once they have to have that meeting with me the first time, and they realize that I am there to help them, and that I'm, you know, these are my students. They were me when I was that age. It helps decrease that library anxiety. They know that they can come to me later on, that they'll meet with me as many times as they want, and that I'm genuinely interested in helping them. And then I create that bridge with Dr. Ross. Again, if somebody's having trouble, if we're struggling with the topic or whatever, that feedback gets to her as well.
And it helps them get organized, which is one of the next things we wanted to talk about a little bit, because a lot of college students are not very organized. I teach them to save everything, every quiz you have, planning their time, keeping track of their materials. I think, Kevin, don't you have research notebooks that you require students? And here again, Elyce has a comment about planners, I think, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. I am a huge advocate for this. And I think that especially with your freshman and sophomore students who are very like green and they don't have a lot of college experience, and this is probably the first time they've ever been away from home and been away from their parents and not had somebody require them to do their homework at this time or go to bed at this time. I think it's really great tool for professors is to require a planner. And, you know, once a week before class or at the beginning of class, open up their, have them open up their planner and say, this week you have the reading to do, you know, like have them schedule. I mean, I schedule everything. I schedule my work, my doctor's appointments, I mean, everything. And I think like requiring students to do this, because like Vandy said, it does have to be a requirement, because otherwise it kind of goes to the back of the list and it's a great idea, but it's not going to get done. But requiring them to do it during class. And then it also teaches them that great skill, because having a planner is a great life skill, and it teaches them that, and then they carry that on through their life. So I think that's a great tool for professors. I love my planner.
One semester I had all these extra old notebooks and old dividers and lots of stuff like that. And I took a bunch of these into my classroom and said, you all need to be better organized. You need notebooks and planners. And I put them out there and they grabbed them up. It was like a free-for-all. It was really fun. And a lot of those students really did do a lot better job of keeping up with their materials. Kenneth is going to talk a little bit about office hours, I think. And Margot has something to add to that. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think every faculty member who's watching knows the struggle, right? The struggle is real when it comes to compelling students to come to office hours. Actually, I learned as we were sort of prepping for this particular panel, I learned from Margot, right? What would be a good strategy to use to get the students to show up. So Margot, I'm gonna cede the ground, cede the floor to you to educate us all on how to get the students to show up to these office hours.
Okay, well, I have a story. So freshman year of college, we all took this test for this class, Meanings, Message, and Culture, and it was so hard. It was my first test that semester, and we all just bombed it. We did so bad. And the professor kind of had a feeling this was going to happen because it was all essay questions and we had never dealt with that before. And so after, he said, you know what? He handed the test back to us and he said, you all need to come meet with me at your own respective time slot and schedule your appointment, and we're going to go through the test. And you're going to get extra credit on the test when you meet with me. And so I went in, and of course you're nervous because it's awkward going in and meeting with your professor during office hour. It's inconvenient. It's like librarian anxiety. And so you're not feeling it. And so I went in and we went through the whole exam. I felt reassured. I was like, okay, this is what I'm missing. And he told me how I could prepare for it. He was able to kind of figure out where I was at, which also made me feel more connected to the professor. It was like he kind of understood where I was coming from and what I was struggling with. He gave me techniques to improve, and I got my extra credit. And I would have done it again to get extra credit. And people who didn't even find it beneficial at first, they grew to realize that it was helpful. And I feel like any student would do anything for extra credit. Even if it's as easy as going in to meet with your professor for 15 minutes. And so afterwards I was like, wow, that was a win-win. And I did better on the next exam. So I think the extra credit, you can kind of get whatever you want with that one. So
well, and like Vandy said, I always require my students to come in for office hours at least twice a semester. I also have a giant Chinese jar that I fill with really good chocolate. But Margo said something when we were preparing the other day that really made sense to me. She pointed out that when you're on campus, a lot of times it's really inconvenient to go to office hours. You're way across the campus. And now, of course, with COVID and having so much online, you can do office hours via Zoom. And the student can be in their dorm room or wherever, and you can be there too. So I think it's a really good idea to be real flexible about it. The other thing we want to talk about is holding students accountable. Most of us, and I know Kenneth found this out when he first started coming to working at UT Tyler, you really do have to expect them not to do the work if you don't hold them accountable for it. I give a daily quiz almost every single day. If there's an assignment, I expect them to be able to have done it. And I learned that from another teaching conference from a chemistry professor. Kenneth, I think you've got a comment about those quizzes, haven't you? Say your students.
Yeah, in the beginning, I didn't give quizzes, and my thinking was students don't want to take quizzes. Who wants to do that? And I actually listened to the feedback and the evaluations that were given, and students, it was pretty consistent. They wanted more quizzes. They wanted to be held accountable, and they wanted to be able to sort of glean where they were in terms of the content of the course. And so I have sort of implemented bi-weekly quizzes. There are stakes, right? There is a significant percentage of the course grade is related to the quizzes, but they also have opportunities with extra credit to drop the lowest quiz score. They can go to a campus event, and so they can replace a quiz grade. So there are ways in which they can make up for some mistakes if they get caught off guard. But the quizzes are embraced, right? Students want grades, they want accountability, and that was a lesson that I had to learn.
And also, lots of low stakes formative assessments like that are always better. We all know that. There was a comment here about office hours being intimidating, and I found that if you invite students to come in either by their study team or in pairs, that helps to overcome the intimidation as well. Couple other things quickly to run through, and then we're going to talk about our final area. Kevin has talked about using online modules, I think. Is that correct? You've used those for assessments?
Yeah, actually, it was kind of one of those fortuitous things that I'd already been using before we had to go to fully online here earlier this spring. But okay, I do chromatography and mass spectrometry, and there is an online program called Chrome Academy. And they offer a free subscription to basically professional development around this kind of analytical chemistry technique. And it has built-in assessments. And if first time you go through them, the assessments are hard. But I tell the students, look, when it comes time to get your grade, this test for this section of material, I'm going to go on there, I'm going to look. And you probably should have hundreds in all these assessments, because you can take them as many times as you want. If you're going to stop at 50, stop at 50. That sounds like you're throwing away points, but it's pretty low stakes game that they can do over and over and iterate to get to really get support of the material online. And it was also very useful for the finishing out the semester to have that already built in.
One last suggestion that I have found has helped, most of my students did not come to college ready to write the kind of papers that we expected them to. They just couldn't do it. And even the ones who have taken their dual credit courses in rhetoric and composition, a lot of times they really aren't ready. And then you've got this terrible uphill slog. And one of the best ways we have to help them is to make comments on papers, and they look at the grade and they throw all the comments away. I discovered an amazing way to help to assess papers, and that is I do video comments on the papers. It takes me a lot less time. I read it through, I mark the things I want to talk about. I don't mark every single thing, I don't bleed all over it. And then I do video that I use through my learning management system. And I also listen to myself one time before I post it to make sure I don't sound too negative. I can give them feedback with a smile on my face, and they can see that I'm not mad at them when they had their third run-on sentence or whatever, or when they didn't make any sense or missed a transition. The students almost always have appreciated this. They listen to them. They're shorter. They take less time. And I use those even with face-to-face classes now. I don't mark papers the same way I ever did before. Okay, our last area is to talk about how they're underprepared for the emotional challenges. And as we were building this panel, we realized that almost all of the things that we talked about getting them ready for the hard work, building the skills, all fell into, it got reiterated in our discussion of their emotional stressors. So you can hear a little bit of repetition here, but I think you'll see why it's helpful. Elyce was going to start out on this and lead you through some of this. You want to start it for us, Elyce?
Of course. So most students don't know what kind of emotional challenges are ahead when you get to college. Like I said before, a lot of times this is the first time they've ever had control of their lives. I mean, they're away from their family, they might be lonely, they're unfamiliar with the area, you know, they might not have friends in the area, they might have moved really far away from school. They're now on a diverse campus, like they're homesick. And a lot of times what comes with that is you get a loss of self-confidence. At first you have these high expectations of what college is going to be like and you're going to do so great, and then you go into it and like this might be your first experience with failure. You have so much, the expectations are so much higher, and then you also have to keep in mind that not everybody in college is going to be on the same level as far as like how they are living. So for example, like I have a husband and I have a 4-year-old. So I have all of that on top of going to school. I'm not just a traditional college student living in dorms. So you have a wide range of variety that you really have to keep in mind when you're thinking about, you know, students and how to structure your course and everything. And then also we now have the socioeconomic and financial pressures. So they're applying for FAFSA, they have student loans, they're trying to support themselves for the first time in their life, and that's really difficult. And you know, there's a lot of other factors that go into that. And then you also, on top of everything else now, you have the added stressors of COVID, and that has really, you know, it's changed how we're teaching. I mean, a lot of kids didn't sign up for this. You know, they signed up to be in the classroom and now they're online and they have to learn how to deal with that. But we can take steps on how to structure that to where it's not such a big adjustment for them. And so I'll hand this back off to Dr. Ross.
So one of our first bits of advice is to embrace the emotional challenges as teaching and learning opportunities. Those are places where they can really grow from. And of course, if you've already set a standard of you are approachable and you understand and you've had your problems too sometimes, that really helps to make it, it helps them trust you in dealing with that. Teaching the skills that we've talked about, giving the support we've talked about, all of these things will help to make them a lot stronger. Kevin wanted to talk a little bit about how a student-centered classroom will help to support their emotional issues in college.
No, it's I think, you know, and it really echoes a bit, and I won't say too much about it because Kenneth and I have already kind of talked about it before, but you know, to say it a little bit differently, you know, we want to make our classroom a student-centered place where it's open and welcoming. I mean, obviously we can talk about some very heavy subjects, but you know, for the most part, it should be an enjoyable place to be in. You know, a place where, you know, active learning is common, where critical thinking is practiced. You know, where sharing and being part of this community is honored and rewarded. So I think, you know, that we just have to, that has to be our mindset going into the classroom, whether you're online or in person, and part of that is being, you know, cognizant of different people's situations, obviously.
Yeah. And you know, another thing, a lot of times we get siloed into our departments and we forget about all the different services that are available at the universities, like the counseling service, like the financial aid office, and like the library and things like that. John has talked to us a good bit as we've been working on this about the financial stresses that students experience. John, you want to
yeah, sure. So throughout most of undergrad and even into grad school, I was working 2 jobs. I would have to choose which bill I was going to pay which month. And I think a lot of the time educators are like in higher education, that kind of takes a back panel. People don't really notice or know or aware of that a lot of these students are struggling just to survive on top of like struggling with classes. And I think it's important to be aware, you know, we don't always know what every person is going through outside of class.
Sarah Goldrick-Rob's speech earlier today gave a really good background on that, and I hope y'all will look for her slides because she made it really clear, the recent research about how much worse it is right now for those students. And you know, getting to know your students, like John said, to know what they're feeling, what they're going through. I think all of us are aware that during this pandemic, we are all having to swerve toward a more gentle, more permissive, more accepting way of working with students and their issues. And frankly, with our own issues. I know some of my colleagues have had family members that have taken ill, and so we're all in the same boat together. But if you get to know your students, you know their names, you develop a healthy relationship with them. And I know some of you might have 450 students, and it might be harder than you think, but even so, as much as you can, given your circumstances, will make a big difference. Elyce has talked about that some, you know, about when you talked to us about one-on-one.
Yes, so I guess it was my like sophomore year on campus. It was the biggest classroom I'd ever been at UT Tyler, and it was probably maybe 150. It was like an intro to teaching class. And this professor, which now, I mean, he's one of my favorite professors on campus, and he would stand at the door every single day, and he shook everybody's hand as they came in, even if it was just a, hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? That's still meaningful, and it's still a connection, and it's still showing that he cares that you're there. And that really, I saw a question earlier about like, what do you do if you have 300 kids in a classroom? So that is an idea. Maybe, you know, get the class 10 minutes early, and when you open your doors as kids trickle in, you know, say, hi, how are you? Shake their hands. And then also, I like, you show them value when you ask, hey, like, what do you think, so-and-so, and you call on them. And that gives them a chance to not only voice their opinion, but it also kind of goes back to that, you know, emotional, like imposter syndrome and all that other kind of stuff that goes into that. And it shows them that, hey, maybe I do belong here. Somebody cares what I think. And I think that that's really, really important.
And you know, another thing that really gives them a lot of power and well, not power, but it helps them feel less lost and less anxious is when you do use study teams and different kinds of things to get students to know each other. I've actually had students say to me, Dr. Ross, your class is the only one where I actually got to know my classmates. You know, we've got a big campus. A lot of students are commuting these days. I think this is going to be even a bigger issue if many of us are online this fall. And so we're going to need to be thinking about ways to build in community. One thing I've started to do is I've already started sending out emails to the students that I know are enrolled in my classes, asking them about themselves, asking them to send me information and ways to contact them and things like that, so that they know, even if we end up being all a bunch of faces on a screen, that I know a little bit about them and I know who they are, what they've been about, and what's been going on in their lives. Margot, were you about to say something?
No, that was me.
That was you. I'm sorry, Vandy.
Yeah, and I was going to talk about that. In the virtual environment, there are things that we've been doing even before the COVID, but that we've seen with the distant students, where they just feel like they're kind of floating out there. Well, now that we have COVID and everybody's kind of been turned into a distant student, whether you signed up for it or not, that creates a lot more of that distance. So one of the things that we did was when we did the study groups, you know, we created a Zoom room for that one study group, and it was open 24/7. So whenever that group could get together, they could drop in and talk to each other, kind of almost like the virtual environment that they might have had as a study group face-to-face, as close as we could get it. And it was a really good thing. I've had a lot of positive feedback from the students about that, because they're like, I could actually just talk to someone at, you know, another student. I wasn't just floating by myself.
Yeah, I'd like to add that that also, it helps students be accountable when they see that there is a face and their professor is a person. I mean, of course, everyone is a person, but when they actually because professors can be othered so often, you know, you don't see their life apart from the classroom. And so when you see like, okay, my professor cares about me, I'm accountable, it makes you kind of have a pressure like, okay, I need to get my stuff done. I need to do this. It's personal almost, you know, and I think that that is a really big part in the learning relationship between the student and the professor, where it's personal.
Yeah. Another thing, if you're doing online, when you do your synchronous sessions online, if you will open up your Zoom room a little early, and students can kind of gather in there ahead of time. And I've had students tell me they kind of enjoy that chatting time as well. It's sort of like what they do when they come into the classroom. Well, we're getting close to the end here of our list of things we wanted to talk about. Kevin has talking about redoubling your efforts of on all the help we've already suggested, making expectations clear, helping people getting started on that work using the CPAs. Kenneth has a recommendation about an improv class. You want to do that one for us, Kenneth?
If you get the opportunity, I know it sounds strange, but I picked it up along the way. Someone gave this advice and it's such an excellent idea. If you get the opportunity, take an improv class. Why? Well, because it's going to teach you how to be an active listener, and it's going to teach you how to be able to observe what's going on and function within your space and be able to improv and not sort of be so rigid in the space. The students are going to receive that. And it just makes for, I think, first of all, you have fun doing the class, but also it makes for a easier way to sort of create an environment that's sort of fluid in the classroom so that folks are learning. One last thing, I put in the chat a link for a family-friendly policy. That was the language that Dr. Melissa Cheney at Oregon State wrote up that she actually puts in her syllabus. I actually put that same language or similar language in my syllabi. Letting students know, Elyce sort of reminded me of this, there are students that have full-blown families, have children, and you want them to know that we're in a childcare crisis now. And I think we should let them know we understand that. And there are extenuating circumstances where they may need to bring their babies to class, and that's okay, right? And allowing for them to understand that they can still come to class and have to pick and choose whether to come to class or not if they absolutely need to bring their child with them. So yeah, but take an improv class.
It looks like we've got a lot of questions coming up, so I'm going to kind of skim through our last few points here, and then we'll do the Q&A part. Is that acceptable to everybody? Okay, so after the improv class, we wanted to be sure you know that it's important for you to show your students that you love your subject, you're excited about being in the class. Kenneth is always talking about sharing interesting details about your discipline, the topic of the day. Margot thought it was important for you all to know that students want to talk about what's going on in the world, about Black Lives Matter. And also, Margot, I think she said, we didn't sign up for being online in the pandemic, but I want to talk about it now. Is that kind of right, Margot? Is that something you
Yeah, I think that it's really important for the professors to kind of name what's going on. Don't just continue with class. It's important that they address these things that are going on in the world so that the students feel seen and they feel heard. And they're like, okay, my professor understands. I can talk to my professor about this. If I need some grace in this area, I can say, you know what, I have a lot going on. Please understand. And they just know, it's kind of, it just connects you a little bit more and it lets them know that I'm with you.
I think this morning, if you got a chance to see my colleague Kevin Coakley's talk, he gave a list of ways to talk about some of those things, which was really, really helpful. And I hope all of you all check that out. Kevin, you just wanted to tell him to not be afraid about something here. What was that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things here. I mean, one of them is very, very professor-centric. The professors, and I've seen this more and more happen with some of my younger colleagues, and it's, I think it's something that's pretty easy to get around, is that you should not be afraid to say that you don't know something. Kenneth mentioned before, right? Like, we're being looked at like we know everything, right? But really, there's plenty of things we don't know. And even in the midst of teaching, a subject matter that you're an expert in, the good students are going to ask you a question that you don't know, and you'll gain a lot more respect. I can't matter how many times I've seen it on student feedback surveys in the end. A lot more respect if you're willing to say, I don't know, let me find out the answer to that. I'll get you back next class. Or even better, tell them to go to find the answer and report back next class. But you know, from the student side, we also talked a little bit about, you know, not being afraid to fail. And science, that's absolutely critical, right? Because the nature of science is discovery of new knowledge. We must design experiments. We must, you know, carry out those experiments. We see what happens. A lot of times those experiments don't work, but we can probably learn something about them and learn how to do it better the next time. So at the outset, you know, being with freshmen in a general chemistry lab that we're turning into a research-based lab, and they've all been in high school in labs that every time you do them, they work. That's a really big thing to have to break. And so really we're, you know, teaching students that failing is okay is important.
Yeah. Elyce and John had some comments on that. You want to share what your experience was, Elyce, first, and then John?
So actually the story, my very first semester at UT Tyler, I had transferred from a couple junior colleges. I went to college in San Antonio, and then I came back to Tyler, finished my basics, came to UT Tyler. And, you know, I had been an A student all my life. I have been an honor student, A student. I've never had to study. I've never had, you know, it was just so easy that I never had to put in so much effort. And so my first year at UT Tyler, I ended up going on academic probation. I had a 1.25 GPA, and it was really a wake-up call. It was really like a slap in the face, like, oh my gosh, like how did you let this happen? And so, having that failure, I think, I mean, now I've more than doubled that. And, you know, I have I have internships, and I have, you know, all kinds of things that I'm doing very well now. And I think that I would not have had that if I had not failed and I had not had that wake-up call. And sometimes you just need to realize that it's okay to fail, but you have to learn how to recover. And that's the biggest, you know, part about failing is how do you recover?
Yeah. John?
Yeah, I would just say that some people have to learn things the hard way. Like Elyce said, she had to learn to fail before she could learn to grow and succeed and do the things she wanted to do with her education.
So we're about to wrap it up now. Couple things just as a reminder, and then we're going to let the students close us out. I always like to remind my colleagues to try not to be cranky when they ask you the same question that you think you've answered about 1 million times and it's in the syllabus. We have lots of students. They usually only have 1 or 2, you know, only 3 or 4, maybe 5 professors. And little things that you can say can be enormously undermining, especially to a student who's already feeling underprepared or insecure in some way. Kevin, you want to wrap it up with your Captain Obvious comment?
Yeah, no, as we were preparing for this, and I think it also reflective of what I see going on in the chat, right? You know, a lot of people here are familiar with a lot of these best practices, but if you can add a few more to your repertoire, all the better. But, you know, what I kind of take home from this is that, you know, it's really okay to be Captain Obvious or Professor Obvious. And in fact, you probably should be more of a Professor Obvious than you think you are being, because you should not take for granted that they get all of these nuances, that the library is available, that, you know, you have to, you know, I expect you to, you know, interact with me, you know, so much time in class, right? You have to lay these things out very carefully and be absolutely obvious.
Yeah. So Elyce, Margot, and John wanted to have the last word. We're going to be happy to give it to them, and then we'll do the Q&A. So John, you want to start it off?
Sure. So this is kind of what we just spoke about, but I think I really wanted to touch base that failing is important. It's how you grow. And, you know, a lot of these new students, they don't know that yet. They don't know that that's an integral part of learning. So I want to say almost, you know, you don't want to encourage them to fail. Obviously, you want everyone to succeed, but just know that some of them have to do that. Some of them, that's how they get from point A to point B, and that's how they learn. You know, I'm one of them. I'm school of hard knocks right here. You know,
you just gotta give them safe places to fail, places that are
safe. Sure.
Let them know you failed too. I always like to tell them I actually failed a Shakespeare class as an undergraduate, and I'm an English professor. Oh my goodness.
Mhm.
I was a sophomore for 6 years.
Okay, there you go. Elyce or Margot, one of you want to follow up with John? Go ahead, Elyce.
So one of my biggest, I love this quote so much, and it's that they don't put a deadline on learning. And basically it's just, if you need to have a student that really is trying in your class but struggling so hard, if they need to retake a test or they need to, resubmit an essay because it was horrible, it goes back to, for one, you don't know what's going on, and for two, like, they might be giving you their best and they might just need a little bit more work. But, the biggest thing is that they learn. And so, not having that deadline on learning, it's not like, oh, you didn't learn it in this week, we're moving on, sorry. And I understand, sometimes that you do have to move on with the class, but giving them that chance of retaking a test or rewriting a paper or, redoing a quiz or whatever it is, just showing them that grace, and they're actually more than likely going to learn because they got that second chance. And so I think that's really, really important.
I think that's important too. I would say that it is so important to remind your students that you're not learning just for a degree, you're learning for yourself, and you're learning to grow and enrich your life. And this is life. You never stop learning, and you should try to get to a place where you enjoy it, because there's so many wonderful things to learn. And so you should just try to tell them to relax a little bit and lean into it and try to have fun, because it's awesome. Learning is so great. And it's really cool that all these professors and doctors are here today wanting to do the best that they can to inspire and be there for the students. And so I think that's my closeout note. I think it's pretty cool.
Well, thank you, all of you. Diksha, how do we handle question and answers? Is this something that we do in the chat, or do people actually get to speak up?
Here, actually, let me. Well, I mean, we can get a chance to look at it, but I've been kind of following it along, and I think there's looking at the chat and the questions, there's some commonalities, and I think one of them seems to be, and actually, I'm interested in hear some thoughts on different ways to structure assessments online versus in. I think we all had to struggle with this. I know for me, I went to open book exams in my class. But at the end, the end of the rest of the semester. But how else can we do these assessment strategies, let's say, online, and be as effective as we, they are in person?
Well,
I actually have like a little piece on this. In Dr. Ross's class, we tried this too, using the ProctorU system and things like that. And that does help if you're worried about cheating, but I do not like it. It's so stressful having somebody watching you and knowing you're being recorded and your every move, and you can't leave your seat more than one time, and your dog's barking in the background, so you're going to get flagged. Like, it's really, really it's a stressful environment. But I don't know, I think Dr. Ross had some ideas on.
Well, I test ran ProctorU and immediately got rid of it. It was horrible. This is why the reading guides, or the CPUs, the class preparation assignments I used, have been very helpful. And of course, it's good to have a TA to help you grade them, but I would set them up as a quiz on my learning. Our learning system is Canvas. And so a lot of those are you can set them up so they can kind of self-grade, and they get a lot of information from those answers. It takes time to build those. Okay, and I think most faculty I know who are anticipating that although we want to be on face-to-face, we're going to be online in the fall. We're spending most of their summer creating those. I will tell you, I implored all my students last spring when we had to go online to be patient with me, because I wasn't always getting it quite right. But there are some of those online tools are not so terrible. Also, having students do peer critiques can be very useful. So that they get information from each other. I really love my video comments on papers, and that helps as well. Kenneth, what about you? Are there things that you're doing that you can respond to that question?
I'm trying to think, because this semester I've really been trying to brainstorm how on earth I'm going to do this. And basically, to your point, Kathy, I've built quizzes on Canvas. I've sort of taken the attitude of, I don't know. I'd rather not be cynical about my students. And so I'm not so worried about cheating. And, if they're going to cheat, they're going to cheat. But I know at the end of the day that it's better to err on the side of empathy and compassion and trusting that there's just something going on maybe on their side that is really holding some students up. And there will be a few that slip through the cracks that'll give you some tale that's not the truth, but the vast majority are not going to take advantage of that. And so I'd rather just have the exam on Canvas and let them take it, within a specified amount of time. And then also using a lot of discussion questions via Canvas and letting discussions be had and grading those discussions and having less of a sort of exam focused course. So those have been, so that's sort of where I'm going with that.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
From a student's perspective, a way that is encouraging for students not to cheat is, I'm taking a class right now, I'm taking culinary chemistry, and for each chapter, there are, it varies, but there are 3 quizzes that are open note, open resources, whatever you like. And then after everything's said and done, after you submit your assignments, all of that, there is a last, what is it? I think it's like your applied, it's not a test, but it's kind of like a test. It's your final for the whole module. It's your, I can't remember what it was called, but it's kind of like the last part. And that last part is not, you can't have open notes and you can't use your resources. But I think that if you say like, yes, you can use it for this, but you cannot use it for this, that kind of gives them some room. And so they're not feeling like, okay, it's kind of like giving people 2 options, it's like narrowing it down. If the whole thing was no resources, nothing, you can't use your notes, you'd be tempted. But since they give you a little bit of leeway, if you're a respectful student, and if you genuinely care and you have the time, you're going to work within the leeway, and then you're going to respect that little bit of structure that you're given, if that makes sense. And I found it to be beneficial.
One of the things I've realized as I've been planning my course is that I'm going to do a lot less. I'm going to cover a lot less, but I think I'm going to be more skills and student oriented than ever before. And I always thought I was pretty good at that anyway. But I think that one thing is that when you teach students, you have to teach them how to take a test. You have to teach them how to take your test. And so I always give students, I give them a template of what's coming. I have them meet in class and we go over, and we'll do this online in a video conference of what should be on this test, and fill in the blanks. Okay, so we read these 3 poets. What are the important things we said about these poets? Fill it out together. And then I let them use those things to prepare and do their exam sometimes. And I'm going to be doing more of that open notes things. Because, as Kenneth said, we want them to learn it and hold it and keep it. And so if they go through that process of sifting through the information we did together, and getting ready together and talking with me about it and then doing it. And then I always go over it afterwards too, if I can. I don't always do it as much with your class as I did with the undergraduates, Elyce, but I always, so here's what happened on the test. Here's what was a good answer. Here's what is not such a good answer. And I hope, all of us are going to have to just be really creative. The new normal is going to be really different. And being compassionate and humane is going to be really important.
Yeah, and I think there's a good summary, kind of a good strategy is here in the chat, and it says, I have decreased the weight of my exams and give more low-stake assignments that are not tests. So I think that that's also quite fair and gives students a lot of chances and brings them a lot of expectations of how you're going to test them. There's a question here for Van. It says, how many students do you meet on a daily or weekly basis, and about how long do the meetings take? How do you follow up with the students so they don't come for multiple meetings?
I'm embedded in the courses that I work with these yellow slips. So I'm in their, Canvas. I come to class a couple of times a semester. And usually what happens is when they register for their appointment with me, I ask for their cell phone number just in case that morning I happen to get up and can't make it, I always tell them, you know, I want to be able to make sure I'm being responsible with their time. But also if after that meeting, I'm, you know, kind of not feeling as sure about how their research came out, I will text them and say, hey, just checking on you. I will email them and say, hey, just checking on you, making sure everything's doing good. I also try to be in their building every now and then and see them. I get to know their faces a lot. But since I think last spring semester, I met with over 150 students.
Wow.
Yeah. But that's, to me, that's more worthwhile because they get so much more out of it and I get so much more out of it that I'm very happy to put that time in.
It's fantastic. I know that we do generally schedule sessions with our, science librarian, and I think the information that she provides the students is so super valuable, but I think we're probably underutilizing this resource.
Oh, yeah.
Go
ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so there's another question here, and I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I'll throw this out one. Do you have any thoughts on the integration of dual enrollment programs' effectiveness in taking community college classes in high schools and or pipeline preparation programs from K-12 high school to higher ed?
I actually have a couple comments on that because I took several dual credit classes in high school, and when you take a dual credit class in high school, you're just taking a high school class and you're getting college credit for it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to is you're not face-to-face with a professor. You know, you have a high school or a high school teacher that's teaching it, or you're teaching it yourself. And it's the first college experience you ever had. And I think that might actually, not that it's not a good thing. I mean, I do think it's a good thing to get some of the basics out of the way. It does take a lot of load off, like financially and stress and everything else. But as far as expectations go for students, I think that it doesn't set their expectations where it should be. I think that, they don't understand that, it's not the same work they're going to be doing if they do go to a university afterwards, that it's going to be a very, very, it's going to be a long haul to get to where they need to be from that dual credit class.
I'd like to add to that. I do believe that that is the case in many situations, but I think it also depends on the school and the school's communication with the university and with the local community colleges. I went to a school here in town. I went to Grace Community High School, which is well affiliated with TJC and UT Tyler. And so they did help bridge the pathway a little bit better, but that was honestly can be attributed to the fact that we had really good communication with the schools, and they're making it clear the expectations. And so I think that that is a huge part in it, because without that, like Elyce said, it can be pretty ineffective in regards to preparing a student for college. But it is beneficial in getting, I guess, a class out of the way, if you want to view it that way. But yeah.
I think both points are well put. I've been very concerned about this, and a couple of years back, I got UT System to commission a major study of how dual credit was working across the state. And in fact, the evidence suggests that the students who take dual credit, they tend to be college bound anyway, and so they tend to do okay in college. But I think a lot of it just depend very much on the integration of the school system and the colleges in the area, which is one of the reasons why I wanted us to start out with this big move of better communications between the high schools and the colleges. In fact, our MA program right now in English, one of the biggest groups of students I teach are high school English teachers who want to become dual credit teachers. And so my big job with them is, even though I'm teaching them Victorian literature or something like that, is to help them think about their pedagogy. And so I think that's an important piece. The money, the cost of college these days, who can blame anybody for wanting to try to get college credit for as little money as possible? I always remind people though about that formula: fast, cheap, or good, pick two. You got to be careful about it, and you want to be sure that students are getting good ones. Another thing.
Can I add something? We actually do a pretty good job at UT. I actually taught a dual credit course, a couple of them, the fall before last.
Yeah.
Or actually it would have been last fall. I actually had to drive an hour to a satellite campus where the high school students came into on campus. They left their high school and they came to campus and came to a class, and it was a unique experience. And
for you,
for me, indeed, right? But also for them, it was actually kind of exciting after we got through the initial sort of anxiety I think they had of me coming down there and teaching the class. But the one thing I wanted to note, because I can see a lot of folks in the comments saying different states have different ways of doing the dual credit, and I would say to my students, that's federalism, right? This would be a great lesson in federalism, the good and the bad. But yeah, dual credit at UT, when you have the professor going into the classrooms, I think they can be pretty effective if you're using the same sort of.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that like the class that I was talking about, we were actually like on our high school campus, we never left. And the professor came in once a year, I believe, just to introduce herself. And that was pretty much the only interaction we ever had with her. And other than that, it was just, everything was kind of online, but I mean, it really, and then we had a proctor teacher, which was one of our high school English teachers we went to her classroom and she would help us if we had questions. But other than that, like we never saw our professor. So I just wanted to clear that up, that it wasn't anything about, they're not all the same experiences, but we didn't ever see our professor. And so that was probably a big factor in that as well.
Diksha has given us the high sign. We're about finished. And I just wanted to finish with one final comment, which is something we started out with, which is I think we need to remember that our students don't always know the uses or the applications in the long run of our disciplines or why we're doing things. And one of the things that I think has made me feel as though my English classes are useful to all of my students, no matter what their major is I talk to them always about how the skills we're doing, like how to read carefully, can actually be the skill of how to analyze things around them more carefully, how they learn to look at details, they learn to review, they learn to communicate with each other. The different things that we do in an English class are actually life skills. And I think when you help them see that, no matter what you're teaching, even if they have to take it because it's a requirement, or if it's a course, they don't really like Shakespeare or whatever, I think that helps them get the sense of the value, the thing that Margaret was talking about, the real ultimate value of their education, because finally we want them to leave being lifelong learners. So thank you so much, folks. Like I said, all of our stuff is on my page, and I think a lot of you have shared some really cool ideas, which I hope Diksha will share, and we can add those as a part of a repository of helpful links and resources to you all. Thank you, Course Hero, and thank you, panel.
Thanks.